Welcome to another episode of Term Sheet Teardowns. Today we're going to talk about dividends. Again, this is not legal advice. This is for entertainment and educational purposes only. But hopefully I can share some of my perspectives on, the business case for these different terms in term sheets. And in this case, particularly dividends. So first of all, we got to understand, I'll get on the same page, what a dividend is. So a dividend is simply a share of the profits that are paid out to shareholders, right? So if you have a company, you generate $100 in profits, you want to pay those profits out to your shareholders, then you would pay them out via dividends. You dividend out that $100. So if you have two investors, they each own half the company, then each of them would get 50% of the profits in dividends. So that $100 would be split out 50-50 to them. If you had a different combination, maybe 80-20, one investor owns 20% of the company, the other one owns 80%, then, $80 of that $100 would go to one investor and $20 to the other. And all in the form of dividends. That's just what they're called, paid out. Now, in the world of venture capital, we invest in preferred stock for the most part. And if you think about preferred stock is different from common stock in that it sits right between like debt and equity. It's truly equity, but it kind of acts and walks and talks and acts like debt. What do I mean by that? Well, instead of having an interest rate, preferred shares typically have a dividend rate. And that dividend rate is usually fairly stable and looks a lot like an interest rate, right? It may be like, hey, we pay out 10% annual dividends to our investors that hold our preferred stock. And in some cases, like the preferred stock doesn't have the same voting rights and other things, just like a debt holder wouldn't have voting rights in a company. And if you take that preferred share structure and you bring it over to the world of venture capital, which is really what was done way back in the day, you have this thing called dividends. That may or may not really make sense for a startup, right? Because startups are burning a ton of money. They're not really built to be profitable and paying out dividends, and yet you have this dividend clause. So if you look at a lot of term sheets, so I pulled this term right off of the National Venture Capital Association's templated term sheet. It says the Series A preferred will carry an annual, X% cumulative dividend payable upon a liquidation or redemption for any other dividends or distributions, participation with common stock on an as-converted basis. Now, what that's basically saying is that if you invest in the Series A preferred round of a company and you buy Series A preferred shares, then for each dollar that you invest, you will get X% paid out as a cumulative dividend that won't be payable typically until the company is liquidated, meaning like it's acquired or it goes public or whatever, or that your shares are redeemed through a whole other different clause called a redemption clause, wherein the company essentially buys your shares back, and that the preferred shares will get paid this X%. So let's say it's like a 10% annual cumulative dividend. Well, if I put in $100, then every year I'm going to get $10 of cumulative dividend that just kind of stacks up, right? So that's what's going on here within these term sheets. Now, the thing is that in the last 15 years of doing venture investing, and I've invested from the seed stage all the way up to the pre-IPO stage, I've seen this term or similar terms in tons of term sheets over the years. I have yet to be paid out any dividends on any of the investments we've made. And that's not because I'm a bad investor. I've made a lot of really great investments. It's just that one of the things with these dividends is that oftentimes they include this if and when declared by the board provision. And so dividends only start really being paid out or accumulating or started if the board decides to start that process. And the reality is that most boards aren't going to do that because most companies don't have any profits to actually start paying dividends. And even if they do have any sort of profits, usually the board is like, no, let's reinvest those profits back into the company to drive future growth. Because what we're really going for is building this into a really, really big company, not taking out a ton of dividends. So why do they keep showing up in term sheets? Well, I mean, part of it is just this is the template, it's the standard. They always show up. They're kind of a negotiating piece that honestly, I wouldn't waste a ton of time on either way. In most cases, I'll explain some of the cases where it actually might matter. They also show up because they give the investor some leverage and another negotiating point that they can, push back and forth on with the entrepreneur. They also provide some leverage for the investor in terms of pushing entrepreneurs to really, swing for the fences and drive a really great company and build a really big company, which is what VCs really care about, right? We're not in it for, 10% annual dividends. We're in it for like a 10x, 20x, 30x return on our investment. And so the ability to say, hey, if you're not swinging for the fences, then we're going to start pushing to dividend out more and more of the company to ourselves. That motivates entrepreneurs in many cases, because these dividends, the way that they work is it can be a mechanism for VCs to basically say, okay, you don't want to grow super fast, that's fine. We're going to vote to start issuing these dividends. And what that's going to do is, because you may not have enough cash to cover the dividends, we're going to take it in stock or other mechanisms, and it starts eating into the equity effectively of the entrepreneur and driving down their ownership of the business over time. And so, they can be this like really interesting negotiation leverage point. That said, I don't see it happen very often. It's more like one of those things that, potentially could occur and does occur in like corner cases, but isn't super common. So at the end of the day, do dividends really matter on the term sheet? I mean, in my experience, not really. Like, I don't spend a ton of time, trying to understand what the dividends are and trying to model that out into my returns and so forth. That said, I think that might be changing a little bit in this current environment, where you do have companies at the growth stage that are struggling. And, you have VCs that may use dividends as a way to generate what we call preferred returns, where basically they say, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to say that every year we're going to get an accruing dividend, which means it's not going to get paid out today, but it'll just build on itself, kind of like cumulative interest, right? Compounding interest. And so every year we're going to accumulate, not get paid out, but accumulate a 10% dividend. And in some cases, maybe even higher, like a 20% dividend. And the reasoning and the thought process behind that is that like it's a way for them to lock in a return. Now, at the end of the day, oftentimes these dividends are tied to owning preferred shares. And so if a company goes public or gets acquired, it may be the case that the investor would rather have a 2, 10, 20 times return through that acquisition or going public. And the only way they would get that is from converting their preferred shares into common shares. When they do that, they lose all of their dividend rights, which is another reason why you don't usually see dividends end up getting paid out. Because either the company is doing really well and the investors give up those rights to dividends by converting to common, or the company's just like really, really struggling and going out of business, and the VCs are going to take most of the proceeds of any sort of sale, like a fire sale to another company. And so there's not going to be a lot left for the common shareholders anyways. And that gets into like this whole other world of like management carve-outs and other things that I'll cover in future videos. In my experience, I see dividends pegged anywhere between kind of like 8 and 12 or 13%. It wouldn't surprise me to see dividends get pushed up closer to the 20 to 30 range in this environment. And that's largely driven by investors seeking for some sort of preferred return, where they're like, okay, look, regardless of like the upside of this business, as long as it sells for like an okay number, I am generating a 20 to 30% return on my investment by having these accruing dividends, right? It gives them some downside protection or the ability to lock in a little bit more of a return. So I do think you'll see some more of that happening. But in my experience, now having invested and investing through 2 cycles, they're really not that common and usually not something to get super bothered or excited about. Anyways, hopefully this was helpful to learn a little bit more about dividends, particularly as how they relate to the world of venture capital. Anyways, check out some of my other videos, like what is a term sheet in venture capital? What is it? Why is it a little different than other term sheets? What does it mean? How to walk through it? Thanks for joining.